Welcome to the Finding Your Freedom podcast, the podcast helping high-achieving professionals thrive with freedom and purpose. I'm your host, Nat Baldwin. In each episode, we'll explore transformative journeys, practical strategies, and inspiring stories to help you create a life aligned with your true values. Whether you're seeking to optimize your current role or explore new paths, this podcast is your guide. Today, I'm excited to be chatting with Fraser, a good friend of mine whose journey as a lawyer has taken him from the suburbs of Glasgow through high-stakes legal work in the UK and the Middle East, and eventually back home to Scotland. Fraser's story isn't your typical legal career path. It's a story about embracing change, making the most of diverse experiences, and having the courage to shift gears when your values and your priorities evolve. We'll talk about how Fraser navigated those big life shifts, from the pressures of corporate law to the thrill of working abroad, and finally coming back to his roots. He's pretty open about his struggles with imposter syndrome, busting the myth of having a perfect career plan, and discovering the freedom that comes with aligning what you do with what really matters. If you've ever wondered whether stepping off the expected path is a setback or a smart move forward, Fraser's story will definitely give you a fresh perspective. We'll explore themes like self-awareness, staying true to your values, balancing work and life, and the power of saying yes to new opportunities, even when they catch you off guard. Whether you're looking for more purpose in your work or just trying to find practical ways to build a life that feels real and fulfilling, this conversation is here for you. And as a bonus, we'll end with a freedom challenge, one simple step you can take this week to get closer to your own version of freedom and happiness. Let's kick off with, can you give us a brief overview of your life journey, your career so far, and highlight key moments and achievements that have shaped who you are and where you've got to today?
Yeah, typical middle class life in Glasgow. If you imagine if the In-Betweeners was set in the suburbs of Glasgow, that was pretty much me and my friends. Went to state school. It was a very good school, but funnily enough, I would say like violence was never far around the corner, which might sound strange, but that's the reality of a state school in Glasgow. I was relatively high achieving head boy, but avoided getting beaten up because I played rugby with the school hard man who went on prison for running a drug gang. I found out opening the newspaper. That was the world I grew up in. I don't want to oversell the hard knocks part of it, but it was there. And I do think there's an element of that maybe being useful, being helpful, because it certainly puts things in context. The negotiation on a call is somewhat lower stakes when you've seen people beaten up at school. Middle class upbringing, parents were very supportive. Mum wanted me to be a lawyer. Dad wanted me to be a rugby player, so I became a lawyer. So strong mum, strong dad gave me a good start. I finished school, went straight to university to study law, Glasgow University. I did my degree there. Then you have to do a postgraduate if you want to practice as a lawyer. So went up to Aberdeen University. First time moving away from home, I moved to Edinburgh, where you and I met. That's where I started my traineeship with a law firm called Henderson Boyd Jackson, now Addleshaw Goddard. I did my 2-year traineeship, and I, at that stage, this was 2007, 2009, and I wanted to be a property lawyer, a real estate lawyer. And for the sort of financial historians among 2007, 2009 wasn't a great time to be getting into real estate because there was a global crash. That resulted in me having trained in that area, not getting a job, and instead taking a job in Aberdeen, where I went to work in-house as a company lawyer. And it was a very glamorous start. They did payroll and tax for global workforces. That was somewhat of a reactive move because of the circumstances. It wasn't something I had set out to do. I found myself working there. It was an interesting experience. I was essentially the only lawyer for this relatively large company that had offices in America, Aberdeen, Scotland, and in Perth, Australia. Not fully knowing what I was doing because I was so junior. It might sound funny to sort of non-lawyers thinking you had a degree, you'd done your legal training, you're in your 20s, can you be junior? The reality of practicing as a lawyer is you are still pretty fresh at that stage, and you maybe don't have enough hours under your belt to really know your stuff.
I remember when I went to become a trainee, I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Yeah.
One of the partners asked me something in my first few weeks, and I think I wrote and just said something like, "Oh, this is illegal." It was, looking back, the first 6 months, I was a bit of a car crash, and I was stuck in student ways. When you got that job with a high level of responsibility at a young age, I wondered what that was like to deal with.
I think it was good. I didn't know what I didn't know. So I think I wouldn't say I would ever do anything that kind of strayed on or negligent or dangerous, but I didn't really have to stress about too many things. The business was quite straightforward and a good learning ground because most things were within my capabilities. I could rely on instructing lawyers that did know what they were doing when it came to anything specialist. So it was a nice environment to learn that. But yeah, I definitely started to feel a little bit undercooked as a lawyer. I suppose if you compared it to anything else, like some sort of medical professional where the stakes are higher, if I'd been asked to do any sort of serious surgery or operations, I would have been out of my depth. And I didn't like that feeling. I wanted to be more capable, more in control. At that time, I was living with a friend, Chris, mutual friend of ours, who's gone on to be successful in law. He was working as a corporate lawyer for a law firm and doing a lot of work, which I thought sounded really quite interesting. But I think, if I'm being honest, more of the driver at that stage was I was a sort of competitive young guy, and I saw my contemporaries, including you, Chris, and other friends, start to overtake me and get quite good at what they were doing. I probably started to worry that I was maybe getting left behind. It was a good job. The hours were great. The money was better than any of my contemporaries were getting paid at the time. It wasn't amazing money in the grand scheme of things, but for a young single lawyer, it was great. But I started to realize that that was going to be short lived. I could see my friends starting to do more interesting work and be on that sort of trajectory. I thought, well, if I'm still here, as comfortable as it is, I don't really see where I'm going to be, or I could see where I was going to be, maybe more accurate. I could see where I was going to be in a few years. And I didn't like that. And that's what prompted me to make my first of many moves.
So to tell us more about that next move and some of the reasons, which sound as though they were mainly career driven, a sort of desire to succeed and get ahead more than anything.
It was probably one of the few times I've been quite goal oriented and focused and said, I want to do this thing. That thing was I want to be doing a certain kind of law, which happened to be corporate transactional law, M&A, joint ventures. And that was what Chris was doing, and it sounded good. I liked everything about it. I thought, that's what I want to do. How do I go about doing that? It was a push and a pull. I was running away from the fear of being stuck and not having learned from people. And I think something important is working for someone who you respect and admire. I want to be more like this person. I admire the way they do things, or they're impressive. And I was sort of had to be that to myself because I was the only lawyer in a company that didn't have lawyers. There was a bit of running away from the fear of being stuck and not learning, and then there's a bit of a pull towards the role of a corporate lawyer and the lifestyle. So what I did about that was look for opportunities, had a few interviews that the fit wasn't right, the role wasn't right. Then through Chris, I got into corporate law. He was working with someone whose husband worked for Burness and now Burness Paul, and he was a corporate lawyer looking for someone. I sent an email introducing myself, and despite having zero experience, they brought me in for multiple interviews, and it went well. They took me on, and I joined the corporate team at Burness Paul. I stayed there for 3 years doing corporate work, and that was a bit of a steep learning curve, but a career-changing moment.
So you went back to private practice in the legal profession. You started off in the typical way that most lawyers do, doing the training within a law firm. You then went out into the real world to work for a company, which is unusual at that age. But you did have that experience of working in the real world, which was attractive to the law firm you then joined back with. Do you remember the differences jumping back into a big law firm?
Yeah, you're right. They identified the experience I had in-house as valuable. It's worth highlighting because it's easy to think you've wasted time. I'm a firm believer that no experience is bad experience. There was probably there definitely was skill set I was picking up without necessarily realizing it. So, sitting day to day and chatting with the CFO or CEO, most junior lawyers don't have that exposure. And the first time they are sat in a room with someone at that level, they can find it daunting. So I didn't realize it was a skill, a valuable thing to have. I think you learn to think outside the box more because maybe I didn't have as much legal knowledge and experience as I would have liked. So you had to be creative and come up with things. One story, when I was new at Burness Paul, we were doing an M&A deal. A client was trying to buy this company. Long story short, the way the company had been structured, one of the owners didn't want to sell and one did. And the one that didn't want to sell didn't have to sell. And that would have scuppered the whole deal. And my colleagues, who were significantly more experienced and much better than me in every sense of being a lawyer, were understandably looking at the black and white and the legal position and arguments. I didn't have that skill set to rely on, but I did have the sort of human understanding of people. I had picked up on what the person that didn't want to sell the company, what I thought drove them and what they were interested in. And it wasn't money, it was something else. So I said to the client, after consulting with the partner, I think this is what this guy wants. Would you be willing to offer him something that isn't money, more involvement in the company? He wanted to be part of it. And they said, we can do that. So they said, if you let us buy this company, we will give you this role, which involves you. He signed the next day. Probably one good thing I did at that stage of my career. But it was maybe an example of just how being human and reading the room was good experience that you wouldn't necessarily put on your CV.
You were starting to learn your skill set. When you start out, you don't really know your strengths, weaknesses, and values. You think that it's all about learning what law's about, but that's not the real world. The real world is we all have different strengths. Maybe at that point you were finding out that one of your strengths was people skills and problem solving, like reading a room. I'm also wondering about your experience at your active payroll and whether that cut through the BS into the real world. You realise the Wizard of Oz sort of thing where you actually realise this is just people having a go. Everyone's just having a go. I think it took me a few years to realise, hang on a second, no one really knows everything. When I was 20, I probably thought that people who were 50 knew all the answers, they knew everything. It took me a few years to realise, no one really has any of the answers. Everyone's kind of just giving this all a go.
Yeah, it terrifies me because I'm okay with that in business, but when I start getting on flights and going to the hospital, it starts scaring me that not everyone has all the answers I would like them to. I'm half joking. You're absolutely right. Having your eyes open to that, having an appreciation. When you're an in-house lawyer, you become the client, relying on private practice lawyers selling legal services. You're relying on them to give you good advice. You start to know what's good advice, and it makes it easier when you're giving advice to what is useful and what's not.
Give it the right way.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want 10 pages of regurgitation of legislation. Here's what you need to know, and here's what I think you should do about it, or not. The most sort of tangible difference was the hours. I went from a 9 to 5 role, working most hours in the day. That was partly the way of the world. Remote working was less of a thing. You went into the office, you didn't leave till everything was done. Even things that could wait for tomorrow, you cleared your desk because you didn't know what was coming. Partly self-inflicted, as I was so new that everything took me twice as long. One of the main challenges. The easier route would have been to stick with that job I had, but the challenge was taking this step. And one of the few times I pushed myself, I didn't say, I know what I'm doing. It was more like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I think I can if you give me a shot. I did a bit of extra hand holding. I was lucky enough to get that. Worked with some great people who were willing to give me that support. It took me quite long to do everything at first, but by the end of that 3 years of essentially just putting in a shift to get quite good at it, I was approached by one of the biggest law firms to do the same thing for them in their Abu Dhabi office, which was the next big step career-wise.
So you then went to Abu Dhabi. I'm interested in that sort of transition and how that came about. It sounds as though that kind of fell on your lap, but was that kind of a reactive rather than active? You weren't looking for a job.
100%, 100%. And that'll become a common theme during this chat, this sort of reactive falling on the lap thing, because that's my story. You have to be in a position to take the opportunities and also take them, right? Not everyone is willing to move to Abu Dhabi. Now everyone hears about it. It's got the Formula One.
I think you lived in Dubai for 10 years.
Yeah, I think my mum does as well, but no one knew where it was. I didn't know where it was, so I had to make that decision. But yes, you're absolutely right. It was reactive. I loved working at Paul, and I'm not just saying that because I'm back there. I genuinely did. It sort of ticked a lot of things that were important. My hourly rate would have been more, I think, had I worked at a fast food restaurant. Because of how many hours I work, the pay for a junior lawyer isn't great. It gets better at that early stage. Back then, you'll remember it. But I loved the work every day. I would come home, learn more. I loved who I was working for. I wanted to be like them. There was a good social scene. Everything about it was just nice and great. And I decided to buy my first flat in Edinburgh, near the office. I could walk down the canal. I was getting ready to settle down. I was skiing with my girlfriend, now wife, and her family, and I got an email from a recruiter saying, "Would you be interested in speaking with Clifford Chance?" And they're like say one of the biggest firms in the world. So if you're a football player and Barcelona come knocking, you kind of you want to speak to them, right? And that's what I did. But the whole time, I remember saying to Lucy, my wife, "It'll be fun to go through the process. They're not going to hire me. I didn't know what I was doing 3 years ago. I'll go through the magic circle machine and get spat out the other end, but at least I'll know about it." And so much, it was all remote because they were based in Abu Dhabi. This was 2014, I think. We were doing remote interviews. I did it with a shirt and a suit and a tie, but no trousers on. You couldn't see that, but I just thought, well, I'll have a funny story. Remember that time I interviewed for Clifford Chance with no trousers on, and they laughed at me for different reasons, but I was really the one laughing. It just sort of went really surprisingly well, and after multiple rounds of interviews, they gave me a job offer. I was fully prepared to turn it down because, again, life was in a good place. I just met Lucy through work. We had a great social scene. You were part of that. We were going on holidays. Life was good. But being honest, the money they offered was very good. It was like 3 times what I was getting paid, and it was tax free. This is the context of what was on the table. I was still genuinely going to turn it down. This is because I was seeing what lay ahead of me, and I liked it. I was like, I want to be like these partners I'm working for. I like where I'm living, met this girl, got a good friendship group. These are the things that matter, right? Long term, I'm going to be fine and happy. I bought a flat. It was 1 bedroom flat in Edinburgh, and it was part of a big old converted house. The next flat was an old gentleman. I think his name was John, and he was a really nice guy, and he was in his late 80s, and he lived there with his girlfriend, who was in her 60s. They invited me around for a drink to get to know them. I moved in December. It was lovely. He wasn't someone boastful. I had to sort of drag the stories out of him, but he had this amazing life. He travelled around Europe in the war, played rugby internationally with Oxford or Cambridge. Um, He'd been based in Africa, working for an oil company, and he'd come home and been the rector of a prestigious school. I was sitting with this neighbour in his 80s at the end of his journey. I was settling down, laying my roots. I thought, was I supposed to meet him? I don't really buy into fate or anything like that, but was there an element of, I've met this guy, he's had this amazing life, this amazing journey, and I'm got this adventure presented to me. It's there for the taking. I'm going to say no, but maybe I should say yes and take the adventure. And I did. The thing that tipped me the most, thinking, let's go and have an adventure. I remember because I said to Lucy, why don't you move in with me? That was a big step for us personally, certainly the first time I'd ever had a girlfriend long enough to ask them to move in with me. And he said, yeah. So I remember saying, well, you can still move in with me, but it will be in Abu Dhabi instead of south of Edinburgh. So we went for it.
And do you remember how you were feeling about moving? I guess there'd be mixed emotions, a bit of excitement, fear, and what am I getting myself into?
I mean, I remember massive imposter syndrome. I think most of us have it. I've yet to meet someone who doesn't have imposter syndrome. I just had bags of it.
When did they find you out, Clifford Chance, then?
Well, believe it or not, I stayed there for 5 years. what I said to myself was, if I last a year, I can at least have a year on my CV at a Magic Circle law firm. But it felt like a risk-free role. The guys I worked for at Furnace Paul were again, they were great. Just get that experience, come back, your seat's waiting for you, which was lovely because like it was a sort of a free roll of the dice. The imposter syndrome was there, and it's quite interesting because it's probably been there the whole time, but I've always been fine. So maybe that's something to take away for anyone else who has imposter syndrome, unless you're a pilot and you don't know what you're doing, in which case, please, you know.
It's really interesting. Imposter syndrome is a lack of confidence that we don't believe that we have the competencies to do the role that we're being asked to do, that people expect more of us that we can't fulfill. I guess that's why I come back to this sort of old. I think it's useful to think people are just giving everything a go to a certain extent. No one has all the answers. Okay, try and say that, get through to people and get around imposter syndrome. Do the best you can, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses, like I said before, and you're going to be bringing something to the role that's unique and will be value to the employer or the law firm. If you're able to adapt and move with what they're asking, that's a really important skill set. Ultimately, employers are hiring for attitude now, hiring for people who are able to adapt, because if you can, then you mold to the role. You don't necessarily have to have all the competencies for the role.
I think a little bit of imposter syndrome is a good thing. It's knowing where the line is. You know, if you're doing heart surgery, flying a plane, or giving tax advice, if you don't know what you're doing, and if you get that wrong, you know, planes are going to fall out the sky, people are going to die, people's tax bills, you know, it's all going to be wrong. You can't mistake it for a lack of competence. You've got to know what you're doing.
You just got to know what you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I've seen people do, including myself, although I think I've been somewhat better at not doing it to myself, is putting like imaginary barriers in a way. I know people who say, oh, take this job, but I can't, I need to get this qualification first. And also you applied for the job and they said you're not qualified. Oh, no, but I think that qualification would help. If that is the case, you know, if you want to fly a plane, you have to have a qualification, right? You want to be a doctor, you've got to be qualified. But a lot of jobs aren't like that. A lot of other things in life aren't like that. So I think it would be like question, are you putting a barrier there that isn't really there? Why are you doing that? Is it a form of procrastination or avoidance? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but yeah, I think that it's the difference between real, tangible things that you need to know before you can do something versus self-imposed obstacles.
Let's explore a bit more about Abu Dhabi, that you moved to the Middle East. I've never actually been apart from to fly through it. So tell us a bit about what it was like culturally to move there.
Straight off the bat, it's nothing like how people imagine it. People's perceptions nowadays are more aware of it. It has changed a lot. I lived there for 9 years, and even in that time, culturally, it changed. During the month, you couldn't drink water in public. You couldn't eat or drink anything, but that even down to, you know, a glass of water if you were in public. By the end, you could sit outside at a cafe drinking a glass of wine at lunchtime in plain view. So that was just one example of how things have come on. But it's a very cool place to live. We lived in a sort of apartment block, which was almost like Spanish Mediterranean style villas overlooking a golf course on the beach. Abu Dhabi is a series of islands, which people don't really imagine. I think they picture rolling sand dunes and desert, maybe the odd oasis. Not really like that. Series of islands, so water everywhere, bridges everywhere, very high rise sort of CBD, a financial district, whole island with a F1 track, multiple theme parks, hotels, a golf course, a very vibrant place. Professionally, it was good because it's a sort of small place, growing constantly. So there's so much activity. They've got ambition and resources. You were part of it and exposed to more work and more senior people than in, say, London or in New York. The work variety more varied. A very exciting place to work. I worked very hard though, and that was fine. Again, you know, I'd been used to that. It was what I signed up for to some degree. But the main reason I ended up moving was because I was spending most of my life working. I like my work, but that's no fun.
When you say moved, tell us more about that.
Yes, I was offered the position to go back in-house as a lawyer. This is quite unusual. It's quite a linear career path typically. You do school, you do university, you do settle in an area of law that you like, whether it's corporate law, employment law, real estate, whatever. Just to recap, I had trained in real estate, gone in-house to work for a payroll company, come back into private practice to do A work, and moved to Abu Dhabi to continue to do that, and then was now going back in-house again because I was presented with an opportunity, and you can see the posters behind me. It was the Abu Dhabi government strategic events company. So the group was responsible for bringing Formula One to Abu Dhabi. I worked for the company called, and we did a lot of the concerts around Formula One, and some of them you can see behind me. And we also operated some venues. So we had an outdoor site and what became known as the Etihad Arena, which was an indoor multi-purpose venue, which would host NBA games, the UFC concerts, and we also did event delivery. So when the FIFA Club World Cup came to Abu Dhabi, we did the event delivery services on that. So that was an exciting role to turn down. You'll know yourself as someone, with a bit of a background in law, that there aren't that many opportunities that are sort of, I guess, as sexy as that. And I thought that was a once in a lifetime opportunity, a job that's going to be interesting and exciting. So that was the main driver.
Was it interesting and exciting? Did you meet
No,
Beyonce
nothing
and
like that.
Lionel Richie or an Eminem, or were you just sitting in an office? What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like what you said earlier. You assume everyone knows everything and it must be slick. But in my experience, wherever I've gone behind the curtain, it's a bunch of humans trying their best, and some very talented ones, but it was kind of chaotic and challenging. We had the Foo Fighters booked to play, which I was excited about. I grew up listening to them. The day they were supposed to fly in, I got the call from our project team saying they weren't coming. They were supposed to be flying in from Chicago. We had booked them through Etihad. We had booked them half of a, I can't remember the exact model number, but commercial airline that would fly from the States. They had the front half, and the back half was sold to the public. And the negotiation of that contract was months, and this was still during COVID or COVID times. We persuaded them to come, paid them a lot of money, and then the new variant of COVID came along. I can't remember which one it was. That put them off again, and they were looking to back out. We managed to persuade them. Maybe that involved getting that plane booked out for them to come on, and we finally got it done after months. They were coming into Chicago on their private jet to then go through security, get onto our plane, and come to Abu Dhabi, play the concert. And when they landed, we got the call saying they had immediately called for an ambulance. One of the band members was taken away. The rest of the band and crew had boarded the flight, but decided not to come. Some of the crew ended up in Abu Dhabi because they hadn't got off the plane. So we lost them and had to find a replacement act. Fortunately, there was Martin Garrix, the Dutch DJ, in town, supporting his friend Max Verstappen, who was about to lift the title in F1. There was also a DJ Snake, who I didn't know, must admit, but seemed to be quite popular. It was chaotic. I went to sleep, not really sure what was happening, around 2 a.m. And our CEO had sent me a contract for Martin Garrix. These things, months back and forth, and had to focus on the main things. At that point, there's a realization he's here around the corner. So half of this stuff in the contract we don't have to worry about. What do we care about? Let's get it signed.
We pay you this, you turn up.
A lot of the risks we worried about in the contracts was essentially if they couldn't make it, for whatever reason, an earthquake in LA, whose risk is that? There's that hourly fight over that back and forth. And we knew that he's here, so we didn't have to worry about that anymore. We set the record for the fastest negotiation and signing of a contract for a concert. It was then broken the next morning by my colleague, a good friend who I work with. The DJ Snake contract arrived, and he was able to turn that around in an hour. He broke my record, which stood for hours. That was chaos of it. You can feel the excitement there as well, right? And then you turn up and it turned out an amazing night. Max Verstappen, the title. We had a lot of Dutch fans there who were looking to have a good time. Our bar sales were our best ever. We'd saved a lot of money on the Foo Fighters. They're quite expensive and paid less to the other performers. We ended up having a really profitable night, which was great and exciting.
Yeah, it sounds exciting to be dealing with these big stars and high pressure environment. I'm sure if things don't go right, you've got to answer to people, even if out of your control. I'm wondering about the Middle East. The perception can be that it's culturally devoid and focused on status and financial wealth. I'm wondering if that's true, what your experience was of that.
It's like anywhere. Go to London, go to Glasgow, pick your life. Do you want to focus on that stuff? Fine, it's there. Do you want to not focus on that? We fell in with a group of friends who we see still. I saw them a few weeks ago in Wales at a wedding. I've seen them again in May down in England. We're seeing them again in November. And some of them are still there. So they just happen to not be that way inclined. Our good fun was packing the cars, driving to the middle of the desert and camping, which involved, staying in a tent, cooking some food, drinking and having a good time. Not opulent. We knew people who went the opposite and they just steered heavily into the fast cars, jewelry, what they were into. I think it's probably a place of choice and knowing what you like and focusing on that. That's what we did. We were lucky to have friends similarly minded. So yeah, I think you can definitely live that life, but we didn't. And part of that was, I guess, because we knew deep down that we would like to move back to the UK. It's a common thing. It's almost a running joke when you move out to the Middle East. Say, how long did you plan to come out for? And people say 2 years or 3 years. Everyone says over 2 years. And you say, when was that? And it's 20 years ago. It's just such a common tale, which speaks volumes of the fact that it's a nice place to live. But I think Lucy and I knew we wanted to move back at some point, which helped us in not going crazy and spending every penny we had on silly cars. At some point, we knew we were going to want to come back and live here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that I guess you just pick your own path. There might be more of that there, but it's good to reflect. You can live a more balanced lifestyle and still live to the values that you would have back home and do interests, sports, hang out with friends and do normal stuff that people do everywhere. So I think it's really good to reflect. These are stereotypes and there's often truth in the stereotype, but it's not the whole truth.
Get me wrong, that in your face. I was at a Maroon 5 concert in our venue. I was in the suite, not with the regular people like me. I was in the rarefied atmosphere of the suite. But there's a guy there with a watch that cost more than my flat back in Edinburgh. Living there, you probably care more about watches and things like that. I do like watches, but I care a lot less about them now that I'm here than I did there.
Don't mention the Rolex collection. Is that what you're saying?
Don't mention that. Yeah. If by collection you mean one, which I bought in Edinburgh when I could afford it. Like the nice things in life. Living there, it's in your face a bit, and it's up to you. And let's be honest, you probably make a bit more money. You can treat yourself and enjoy those things. But that's not what I miss. There's elements of that I miss, but it's the friendship groups. It's sort of being part. It's quite a small community. A lot of expat communities are like that. There's a lot going on, and you feel part of it. Particularly working in high-profile events, I was on the scene, which was cool. A lot of perks, invites to suites at Maroon 5 concerts, the rest. I definitely missed that. The money, of course, but it's these other things that I missed the most.
Yeah, that makes sense. That brings us full circle. You ended up returning to the UK, but as Paul, the law firm where you started, you're now a partner there. What brought you back to the UK? Why did you make that decision?
There was a lot of soul searching. COVID made us feel further away. Before COVID, between coming back to the UK for holidays in the summer and at Christmas and family and friends coming out to visit us, we never felt the distance. Then when COVID hit and travel restrictions, suddenly the UK and friends and family felt quite far. Then we had when girls, Millie and Freya and Lucy, wanted to be closer to her mum and family. That's totally natural. At the same time, I was recognizing that where I was at in my career, it wouldn't have made sense to move at that specific time. So we talked it over and decided to do it in a few years. And part of that was financially driven, essentially saying, what do we want the next 10, 20 years of our life to look like in terms of where we want to live, what kind of house we have, what kind of cars, what kind of school do we want to send the girl to, what kind of lifestyle and holiday. If that's the case, how much money do we need? That was the sort of finance side, and that was quite helpful in terms of setting a timeline and saying, we earn this much, we can save this much, we want to have what we want, that's going to cost this much. Let's save up, that's going to take 2 years. Okay, we've got our time. That was a freeing process, putting it on paper. We were no longer thinking, are we moving home? And when it was just clear, okay, we're not moving home now, but in 2 years we will. Great, let's enjoy it. In terms of why we wanted to move home, realizing that you don't live life on paper. On paper, it's difficult to leave the UAE. Nice job, nice apartment, financially sound, great healthcare, beaches, friends, family. It ticks a lot of boxes.
Sunny,
Sunny,
not sunny,
not sunny in
rainy
Glasgow.
in
Although the
Glasgow.
last 2 weeks have been amazing, but I think that's it for a year. I like my son. On paper, there's a lot going for it. Where do you want your kids to go to school? Do you want them to have the same experience you had? My parents aren't getting any younger. It's easy to assume they'll always be there, but my dad just turned 70. My mum as well, yeah. So I think our children to grow up with their grandparents and not just see them sporadically. That was important to us, recognizing that you don't live life on paper, family, and giving the girls is similar to us. And then also, again, coming back professionally, it wasn't like just take anything. I moved back about 9 months after the girls because I was waiting to find the right role. These things take time. I did a lot of soul searching and looking at every different option, from freelance to going in-house. And, I was at the final stages of a really good role for a household name and the Berners Paul job. They were running in parallel. So it was quite a stressful time juggling my actual job, which I didn't want to leave. It was a great role, but recognized I would have to leave, and then running these sort of other parallel processes and balancing them and trying to figure out what was right for me. And I think where I know where I came to was looking at what I actually liked, what I enjoyed, and to some degree what I didn't enjoy, and then looking at which role would give me the best platform to do that. And I use that word platform because I think that's ultimately what you need. Someone who has a skill set or multiple skill sets, and hopefully you can help people or add value, and in exchange, they're willing to pay you for that. So again, we're getting deep here. What platform enables you're looking for in a job and will reward you the most in a place where you enjoy the people? That's what took me back to Berners Paul. It seemed like the platform where I would get access to the right clients, the right work, the best people in the right culture, in a role that played up to my perceived strengths.
How do you reflect on your journey, career, and how your priorities and values shifted over time?
I'm not even sure.
Would have thought you started driven by
Hmm.
success in a career sense, but then you moved back to the UK for family, didn't you? So, although yes, you found a home in Burness, that wasn't what drove you back, was it? You came back to be near family and friends.
You're right. I suppose in terms of my values changing, a bit of perspective as to what really really counts and what really matters and what's irreplaceable. I'm somewhat reluctant to give advice or just to anyone, personal advice, because I don't think there's any right answer, wrong answer. But and it's always easy. I think when you've achieved what you want and you're comfortable financially, to say things like follow your dreams and follow your passions. And I don't necessarily think that's good advice. I think it's great. I envy you if you something you love and it can give you the lifestyle that you want. And if you have that, then run as hard and fast as you can in that direction. But if you're like me and you don't know what you want to do, I don't even know what the advice would be. But maybe you don't feel that you need to. It's something I often say to younger people. It's okay to not really know. There's a lot of focus nowadays. I think it's a good thing to have your goals, set your goals, and I'm sure that works for a lot of people. It's probably good advice. If you looked at the most successful, maybe they are goal driven. Personally, I've never found that appealing, and maybe psychologists out there would have a field day jumping into why that is. I've been much more reactive in my path. You have to be ready to react. It's not like I'm sitting here going, I want to do X, Y. There's been times I've been forced into doing that and taking that approach. It's okay to not know what you want to do. It's okay if you change direction. I wouldn't recommend it if you don't have to. If you know where you want to go and you can see a path, then straight line's always better. But if you're not sure, that's okay.
I think your story is proof of that because you have gone the road less traveled and unexpected path, but it's been successful and rewarding because of that. You felt maybe it was wasted time. I think it's important for people in these professional service careers who could wait it out and they'll reach the promised land of partnership or whatever it is at the end. Your story proves that there's another way, and actually that other way can be more powerful because you're going to get different experiences, a greater perspective on business and law, but also more life experience as well, that ability to speak to people and connect to people that perhaps you might not have got if you'd taken a different route.
Absolutely. And doesn't answer your question about values changing, but one, I definitely feel almost not taking certain things for granted. I have been very fortunate at different times in my life, whether it's playing rugby when I was younger and getting by some amazing coaches, working at amazing places, and maybe not realizing how fortunate I was. It's easy to look back and recognize I was maybe just a young, immature guy, and but maybe that's changed. I think I'm better now at stepping back and actually appreciating the moment or the opportunity that you're in and saying, oh, this is great. Whether it's just to enjoy it and not always have the grass being greener on the other side, or to say I could be doing more with this. I should listen to this coach. Maybe this guy who played, rugby internationally does know more than me, the 15-year-old boy who thinks he's brilliant at rugby and probably isn't. Or maybe in this job, I should be making the most of the fact that I get to work with this person who's kind of unique in the world and brilliant at what they do and soaking up every bit of knowledge. So that's something I would like to go back and change and sort of pick my younger self.
Yeah, just seeing everything as a kind of opportunity,
Yeah, I mean,
looking positive.
I was just going to say, when I was training and you were training, we were fine. I know personally I could have got a lot more out of that training. It would have involved working a bit harder or longer or just doing a bit more. But I definitely could have got more out of that 2 years than I did. I'm not interviewing you, but that was my perception of you as well. Maybe that's why we became friends.
The first 6 months, I didn't know what I was doing. So I was in shock. This is hard
Mm.
work. And I'm expected to do this stuff, and I don't really know what I'm doing. I did catch up pretty quickly by the end, and I think I was enjoying it by the end, and I had a more curious mindset about how everything worked. I was naive. I thought I'd get a job because people I worked with seemed to like me, but it just wasn't, I wasn't used to playing a kind of corporate game at all. But yeah, okay. And I was going to ask you, if you look back at your career, were there any resources or support systems critical to your success?
I think certain people, I always use the word sponsor. It's someone who takes you under their wing and wants you to be successful. And their default is that you're a good person and trying your best until you prove them wrong, rather than the opposite, with someone who is indifferent to you or worse, almost wants you to fail or sees the worst before you, and every time you have to sort of persuade them the opposite. And I've experienced both. The difference is it's palpable in terms of not only how you can succeed in an organization, but how you can perform yourself. It's like good in a football team, knowing the difference between arm round and the hairdryer treatment. It gets so much more out of you when you feel this person wants you to succeed and believes in you. I've experienced both A lot of that was at Burness Hall. It's very freeing. If you find that person, life isn't lived on paper. When you look at a job, you look at things like, oh, what's the salary? What's the benefits? What's the holidays? But what's more important, or working with someone who is going to get the best of you and want the best out of you and push you to succeed and be so supportive of your career. It's hard to tell that on paper. If you have it, great, hang on to it. And if you don't have that, maybe that's the sign to say, well, maybe this isn't where I need to be. I need to find that person. I'm trying to be that person for others. In my career gone well is where I've had a teacher or a coach or a boss who thinks the best of me, wants the best for me, and is willing to invest, and that in turn gets the best out of me.
Yeah, it's great advice, I think, finding people who just support you and teach you along the way. And I think you're dead right. If people can find others to help them, actually, if you're focused on things like money and getting up the ladder, that will benefit you. You'll get there quicker because you've got someone supporting you,
It's
telling you.
a virtuous circle of everything comes together. I remember reading somewhere that the reason first impressions are so important is that everyone wants to believe they have really good instincts. And when you meet someone and take a dislike to them, you will then spend your time looking for reasons to validate your instincts because you want to believe your instincts. Conversely, if you meet someone, take a liking to them, you will then have a bias towards finding everything they do well. And every time they do something wrong, oh, well, that's a blip.
Totally. My example of that would be my legal training. When I turned up, it was pretty useless. The lady in charge realised quickly, and I gave her evidence that I was pretty useless, but I managed to make a good impression on one of the partners. Then they went around telling everyone else that I was actually all right and I could do a job. When I went to the new people to get managed by them, they looked through that lens of, oh, we've been told he's decent, so we'll look at it through that lens. So I definitely saw it first hand there.
And we actually got
I'm going
in
to
on that.
segue.
I remember, I find it very interesting. Essentially, don't pass on perceptions of people because of that, exactly what you just said. I think it can be so damaging if someone gets labeled that's just totally wrong. We were trained not to do that. I think it's helpful to, this person might need a bit of support, but not saying, oh, this person is useless or whatever. Let everyone make their own.
Generalizing them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally the right thing to do, is make your own mind up on someone and give them a fair shot.
Yeah.
I'm interested in concepts of freedom and how that develops and evolves sort of through lifetime. And I think freedom is a complex sort of subject and means different things to different people. Interested in what you define as freedom based on your experiences.
Yeah. I was going to paint my face blue and white and scream freedom like William Wallace. That's what you want from me, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. As you say, it's so complex, and I'm probably the last person to be talking about freedom. I suppose freedom, I would say it's a mistake to confuse a lack of responsibility with freedom. I suppose at its very basic, being free is like you can do whatever you want, right? Looking at experience unlimited freedom doesn't necessarily bring any satisfaction. There's always something else. That's the beauty of capitalism, right? There's always a next level. There was one point in our lives when we would have been happy to drink wine. Then you get money, you get used to nice wine, and then there's another bottle of wine. And likewise, I'd be happy to go on holiday. Then maybe you start going somewhere nicer. Then you want to fly business class, and then you realize you can go first class. And then there's private. And these guys that make they're up in space rockets. I don't think freedom is doing whatever you want. It's definitely not having no responsibility. For me, it would be having enough time to do some of what you really value in life, whether it's spending time with family, seeing friends, or your hobbies, without constantly having to be doing something else. So there you go. There's the worst definition of freedom you'll ever hear.
I think that's a good definition. It boils down to free to spend your time however you want. Freedom can also mean being disciplined towards the things you want to do, whether that be training for an Ironman or becoming the best lawyer you can be. It's just freedom to make the choices how to spend your time.
Yeah, and this has been relatively legal heavy because of my career, but there was a time in my life, particularly that first 3 years of being a corporate lawyer and then the next 5 years in Abu Dhabi, where I didn't make plans midweek. The hours were so demanding that there was no point in making plans. I would probably have to cancel them. And I look back at that now and just think, God, there was essentially 8 years of my life. And obviously there was some upside to that in terms of career and things like that, but that's a lack of freedom. I didn't have time to enjoy what I wanted, but now that I do have more time, I would say that is freedom, and a freedom that I enjoy.
And that brings us on to the Freedom Challenge. So, for anyone's first time listening, this is a challenge that Fraser's going to set for me, and I'm going to give a go, but you can also have a go yourselves, and I'm going to report back on the next podcast to let you know how I got on with it. So, have you thought of something?
I've done that, everyone, is to send that message. Send an email or reach out to a client you want to work for. Reach out to a friend you've lost touch with. Contact a celebrity you like. Do all of the above. Send it and see what happens. The reason was an email I sent to Berners Paul saying, "This is me. I don't do what you do, but I'd work for you." That's what changed the trajectory of my career. When I was there, I ended up meeting my now wife, a bit of a sliding doors moment. So that one email arguably changed the course of my career and life. Who knows where it will lead you?
Thank you. Yes, I am going to have a think about that. And yeah, I think that will lead to something quite interesting. And I think you've mentioned quite a few times that you've been reactive, but actually I think you've been proactive in making decisions, and sending that email, for example, has been a proactive approach to things as well. And then there have been situations, as you've described, that have been reactive, and that's life. It's not all planned. What is it John Lennon says? Life is what's happening when you're making plans for it.
Yeah.
It's just life takes funny twists and turns. It's how your mindset is in relation to these things that come along, and put yourself in the right situation for good things to happen.
Yeah, maybe you're right. And maybe I'm being hard on myself. I kind of go backwards and forwards. The UAE move to Abu Dhabi is a good example. Landed on my lap. I wasn't out looking for it. I wasn't saying in 5 years I want to be living in the Middle East working for this law firm. Landed on my lap. But there was still, as you say, you still had to make the decision to do the interviews and then take the job and then move your life over there.
Yeah, you must have got plenty of recruiters coming to you at that point. It's not one email. You probably got lots of emails. You picked that one out.
Absolutely. I also got an email from the company that made Take Me Out with Paddy McGuinness. That as
So
well.
nice.
So, yeah, they wanted me to be the guy who presses the lights. I said no. The main reason was I didn't have a talent, where they sort of make them juggle or something like that. So, yes, you're right. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of that being life. Maybe the reason I raise it and I'm sort of critical is a focus on being goal oriented and writing it down. Maybe that is the best way. Maybe that is sort of proven. I've never been like that. So maybe it's not the only way, even if it is the right way.
Yeah, I think that's good. There's lots of ways you can go about your career. Your testament to that is the road less traveled, and why I think you're a useful, interesting kind of case study, if you like, to other people is that law is a very traditional career. Generations ago, you would have been in the same law firm. To go from in-house to private practice to in-house to private practice to different countries is pretty unusual. So it's been interesting to talk to you about that. I think it'll be interesting for other people to hear that you can do different things and end up in a great place. If anything, it gives you a stronger set of skills, doesn't it? You felt like it was wasted time, and it was probably the opposite. It was probably the best time you spent, even if it didn't feel the most linear.
Yeah, absolutely. No substitute for experience of any kind. I was at a sports law conference recently, and there was people speaking, and like from the British Lions, Lawn Tennis Association, Scottish Rugby Union, SFA. One of the common themes that came out was they had all had such a mixture of backgrounds. No one started as a sports lawyer, where one was an employment lawyer, one was in property. Sometimes their experience as an employment lawyer comes in useful. You just never know. Just picking things up here and there, you don't realize you're picking them up. Maybe you never realize, but it is, yeah. Any experience is good experience.
Great. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time and just taking the time to run through your career and your thoughts on that. And I think it's not just lawyers that will take things away from that. It will be anyone, particularly who's maybe focused on professional services and can understand that no matter where you are, there are different routes to take along the way. Thanks very much for your time.